Author Ambrose Bierce from Meigs County, Ohio, wrote in his published 1906 satirical work, The Devil's Dictionary, that there are 4 kinds of homicide: felonious, excusable, justifiable, and praiseworthy. He wrote, "But it makes no great difference to the person slain, whether he fell by one kind or another. The classification is for the lawyers." Bierce, who mysteriously disappeared about 8 years after his Devil's Dictionary was published, wasn't around long enough to realize that classifications are extremely important to one other brand of people as well. All of you listeners sending me emails. Welcome back to Brittlebone, Ohio, and this is the final episode in our Barkers of Brittlebone Trilogy. To quickly recap our case, the official on-the-books explanation for the Barker family deaths was that Susan Barker, who had no known physical or mental health issues, trouble in her marriage, or represented any of the factors most commonly associated with perpetrators of murder-suicides, perpetrated a murder-suicide. The investigation says her thirst for spilling blood was born during an argument with her husband, an argument that was possibly tied to the loss of the couple's child, a mysterious death of its own that had occurred 4 years prior. In this same argument that inspired Susan's bloodlust had also inspired her husband, John Barker, to decompress with a gas can and a box of matches in the woods behind their home, where, in a sudden fit of pyromania, John set some old junk on fire, junk in the exact shape and size of a full-grown flight of wooden stairs. Before he returned home, took a seat on the living room couch, and was shot in the forehead by his wife. It's fair to say, some folks find themselves suspicious about the investigation's role in the case. No name was ever put to the anonymous voice that called in the fire. No details were ever offered about trying to trace that call. And the audio of the dispatch call was never publicly released. Add all of that to the hollow and borderline nonsense explanation given for John's freestyle arson, and an honestly flimsy motive being propped up to support this image of a grief-stricken, gun-wielding, abruptly murderous wife. It's clear that the official report leaves anyone looking for deeper answers unsatisfied. But here are the facts. There were no witnesses to the event, no survivors, nobody who knows what might have been going on in that house leading up to that October day. The Barkers lived right across the street from me, but they may as well have been on a deserted island. First responders and investigators are the only ones who ever saw the evidence inside that house. So all we know is what they've released filtered through an official report. And what they've released has holes in it. It's sad, it's potentially suspicious, but it's perhaps more than anything else just incredibly frustrating to swallow the idea that we're stuck with a reality where there aren't any deeper answers, and that the unanswered questions in the Barker case are likely going to forever remain unanswered. However, back in 2001, in the immediate aftermath of the Barker deaths, almost none of the details that we know today were public knowledge. After all, there were no podcasters running around trying to solve the mysteries of a case already slammed firmly shut and filed away as solved. So back then, none of us really knew anything about the Barkers, so we did what people do. Filled in what we didn't know with some of the most insane sounding shit you've ever heard. I'm happy to report that some of those old theories developed in whisper around lunch tables in the 7th grade have re-emerged in my inbox today. Theories that suggest, of course, this case is full of strange, unanswered questions, because what happened that October afternoon was no ordinary crime, and that what really happened was something so strange that it fell beyond the realm of what police investigators were qualified to investigate. First, a popular idea in my messages is the belief that the Barkers don't stack up well as a murder-suicide or a suicide pact because suicide wasn't involved in the case. In this theory, only the murder part is true, and that John and Susan were both the victims of another party or parties. These theories suggest that Susan had been forced to shoot her husband and then herself, that the anonymous 911 call had been John, but that he had been forced into making the call. Or, an alternate explanation, the voice on the phone had been the voice of the other man, a mystery perpetrator who brought their own cell phone to the scene. And this third cell phone is why the anonymous 911 call never showed up on the phone records for the Barker family. Who exactly was this third party? How did they get away with it? And what was their motive? Suspects and motives do both seem to be largely missing from this theory so far. And while I haven't encountered anything yet that leans me towards embracing the double murder theory, the inboxes are open. If anyone has further ideas or information, please share with the class. Because if this theory were true, it would mean the killer or killers might still be out there. And if they liked podcasts, especially ones with lo-fi beats and theremin sounds, they could be listening to this along with you. Friendly note, if this is the case, please feel free to write into the show. If you have any, comments, details, insights, maybe we could even do an interview and have you answer some things for us. The invitation is open. I will, of course, let you all know if anyone reaches out on this with a substantial claim. But until we hear otherwise, the double murder theory was dismissed as a possibility by the investigation due to a total lack of evidence of any additional parties being in or around the house at the time of the crimes. And I will add to that, I didn't see anyone that afternoon when I took a peek out my kitchen window at the cul-de-sac. And though that doesn't mean someone couldn't have fled the scene, responders did not note the presence of anyone else driving back up the hill, sprinting off into the woods, or creeping around in the basement. There's no sign of robbery and no evidence of anyone other than the John and Susan Barker being involved in the arson or the shootings. So apart from myself, there was no evidence of anyone else even being anywhere near that cul-de-sac. Which begs the question, is it possible that a double murder took place without anyone else ever stepping foot inside the cul-de-sac? And here, we have a few listener theories that suggest this is exactly the case. Remote Murder Theory 1. Hypnosis. Is it possible Susan had been hypnotized, killing John and herself while under the control of another? Or that Susan had hypnotized John, and that's why he sat unmoving on the couch while she raised the gun directly to his forehead? Well, there is actually a recorded case of someone being convicted of double murder via hypnosis. The Copenhagen hypnosis murders took place in Denmark in 1951 when two former cellmates attempted to rob a bank, and one of the men shot and killed two bank employees. After being arrested and put on trial, a jury made the decision that the murderer had been hypnotized by his former cellmate, and they held both men guilty of murder. The case involved 40 witnesses, including guards and prisoners that had known the two men during their time together in prison, that had all attested that the man who pulled the trigger had long been under the control of his partner in crime, who could manipulate him like a puppet and, quote, make him behave as if he were in a trance. So, murder by hypnotism, legally speaking, in the realm of possibility. Though that said, the hypnotist in the Copenhagen case was physically with the cellmate that was under his control at the times of hypnosis. So it's unclear if this remote control is possible from long distances, say, the kind of distance needed to reach the Barkers from outside of the cul-de-sac. Also, it's worth noting that when it comes to hypnosis and its history tied to murder, nearly every case involves a defendant on trial for murder claiming that they had been hypnotized. So apart from that one Copenhagen case in 1951, all other claims throughout history have fallen on deaf ears. And as for our case in Brittlebone, Susan didn't leave herself around to make any such claims. Yet the idea of hypnosis does take a few other forms, as with remote murder theory number 2. What if Susan's uncharacteristic actions were the result of voodoo? occult ritual taking over her behavior and someone else calling the shots, with her body being used as a vessel. In this instance, the type of voodoo would involve someone using an effigy or artifact, most commonly known as a voodoo doll, that is magically connected to a person and used to control them. Unlike classic hypnosis, there are a whole lot more than one case of voodoo claims being linked to murder. A basic internet search opens up a whole different podcast series worth of beheadings, gouged out hearts, and heinous acts waged on both alleged victims and practitioners of voodoo. So here is where we need to make an important distinction, that voodoo is a complex belief system and religion, with many practitioners that emphasize violence does not align with their practice. It's crucial to understand voodoo is often negatively stereotyped, and as a result, there is a long history recorded of people witch hunting voodoo practitioners. They become unrightfully blamed for some horrible acts and targeted by others. Our listeners who wrote in suggesting voodoo as a possible method of double murder don't offer much to sidestep these claims, but they do offer up that the signs of voodoo practice would likely slip completely under the radar in an Ohio cul-de-sac nestled into a Midwestern town with 2 Arby's and 1 Panera Bread. So, could it be the perfect weapon? What if there's a world where the mind control employed was less esoteric in nature and more espionage by design? What if the gunfire that I heard that shattered one PlayStation-filled afternoon of my childhood had been remote murder theory number 3? The activation of an MK Ultra agent. What if Susan Barker had been a long dormant subject of the United States government's illegal human experiment? What if she had been programmed, controlled, and triggered at an opportune moment to carry out a Manchurian Candidate-esque mission that left its target, John Barker, and the weapon, Susan Barker, both neutralized without a trace of evidence? Why would this mission have been executed on a random Wednesday afternoon after decades of marriage? I don't know. Was Susan ever involved with the military or government agencies during which she may have been trained and transformed into a cul-de-sac assassin? Not that the police investigation include in their report. But if these theories of weaponized witchcraft and secret government programs all feel a little bit extreme to you, then what about a clinical condition? A very real disorder that may not have surfaced during any physical or mental health examination that the Barkers had underwent. A special thank you to listener Samantha, who wrote in about this one. Folie à deux is a phenomenon that describes a shared psychosis or disorder in which mental symptoms, typically delusions or hallucinations, become passed from one person to another. Although there were no signs or history of delusion, psychosis, or mental instability in the Barker couple prior to their last afternoon, folie à deux is said to surface in scenarios where 2 people are isolated together. If you recall, investigators suggested that the Barkers moving to Ohio and separating themselves from their support group back home may have caused isolation issues in their new home. Furthermore, folie à deux most commonly occurs when, and I'm lifting this directly from Wikipedia, quote, when women with above average IQs become isolated from their family and locked into relationships with a dominant person who suffers from delusions. Wild speculation time here. If Susan's librarian glasses suggest she held an above average IQ, and if John's meat slab of a hand clapped over Susan's shoulder in their picture is a hint that he was a dominant personality type, and if his inexplicable burning of a staircase in the forest appears like the handiwork of a person in the throes of delusion, then we may have more boxes checked here with folie à deux than we did for any suggestion that the investigation ever put forth. Folie à deux as a phenomenon is still very much being studied and is currently referred to under the blanket statement delusional disorder. And while this phenomenon does not always manifest itself in violence or murder, it certainly has been known to do that, as is documented in quite a number of murder cases. While folie à deux is incredibly rare to the point of being considered a psychiatric curiosity, Susan and John Barker are undeniably an outlier, no matter what common factors are applied to their case. So, the unlikely theory of death by folie à deux seems just as likely as anything else. Ambrose Bierce wrote in his Devil's Dictionary a definition for the word inhumanity. Noun, one of the signal and characteristic qualities of humanity. It's a sad reality that virtually every city, every town with human beings in it has its tragedies, has its crimes, and has its brush with inhumanity. Brittlebone happens to be the place where one of my childhood afternoons was interrupted by one of these signal qualities, and it stuck with me. The Barker family deaths and that burning staircase will forever qualify as belonging to Brittlebone's catalog of strange tales. In a single weekday afternoon full of fire and blood, John and Susan Barker joined the legends of Brittlebone. And now, finally, we come to the most popular subject amongst listener messages as to how exactly that happened. The theories that say, alright, you've covered your true crime angles and your family medical histories and your feral staircase, but there's one character not yet accounted for. See, interestingly, the Barker family case and the house at 816 never came close to gaining the legacy of another house a few states away at the address of 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island. Maybe it's because the Barkers of Brittlebone were only a husband and wife, and there was no annihilation of a full nuclear family, including little ones. Or maybe it's just because no hoax-prone authors ever swooped down ready to cash in on the story in Ohio, but the house at 816 in Brittlebone never became a star like the Amityville horror in New York. Unlike Amityville, our true crime never turned out any controversial paranormal claims packaged into national bestsellers. There were no debunked hoaxes, no Ryan Reynolds movies, no lawsuits, and unlike Amityville's true crime, the mass murder of the DeFeo family, there were no survivors inside the house of 816 to go to trial and to claim demons had made them do it. So despite a lack of clear motive for Susan's actions, there were never any claims of demonic entities possessing Susan Barker. The tragic crime was viewed as just that, a tragic, violent crime, maybe void of obvious motivation, but void of supernatural influence as well. Which is a bit surprising, because if you had been sitting around the lunch table at Brittlebone Junior High in 2001, you would have heard the whispering back and forth about how a married couple had met their sudden bloody end in that house down in the cul-de-sac. That house. The one everyone knew had been haunted since long before the Barkers had ever moved to town. Next episode, we creak open the door to the legend at the center of the Wayward Circle, the theater that played host to the Barker family deaths. Next episode, we step into the house at 816 Wayward Court. Brittlebone, Ohio is written and produced by me, Chance Sinclair, and this post-show is dedicated to those of you who wrote in with your theories that were shared in this episode. A big Brittlebone shout-out to Isaiah H., Groveling Highness, Ingrid Warm at gmail.com, Zach Robin, Edith E., Maria Tom, Morgan Thomasetti, Breadbasket Bloodbath at hotmail.com, Jessica McHugh, John Vaughn, Icebox Thriller at AOL.com, Oh No, Spaghetti Toast, Noel R, Evelyn E, Trashback, Letter Willie _ peace sign emoji, Vermilion Sapphire Alarm, Erica Taylor, Luke Shomo, Kendra Parker, Oblivion Greg at .com, Dusty Bigfoots, Greg, Mark Eshelman, and as always, thank you for listening.